Welcome to the JAZZIZ Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Fagien. On today's show, I'm joined by a true giant, not just of jazz, but of music. Guitarist, composer, explorer John McLaughlin, from the smoky clubs of London in the 60s to the electric outlets of Miles Davis, spiritual journey with Shakti, and of course, the transcendent fusion of the Mahavishnu Orchestra. Few musicians have taken this journey, blurred the lines of distinction between craft and communion, and even fewer have done it with such humility and longevity. Welcome, John. Thanks so much for being here today.
Wow, what an introduction, Michael. Thank you. I'm
You're
honored.
very welcome. So we haven't talked in decades. In fact, the last time we talked, you were so kind because I had done an interview with you back in the early 80s. I ran into you in Washington, D.C., and you looked at me and you said, Michael. And I said, how did you even remember me? Anyway, taking you on a trip back to memory lane, we'll do that in a little bit, but I'd like to begin with Zakir. You shared a beautiful Instagram post about the passing of your dear friend and a beloved musician, humanitarian. Zakir is true to our fans as well, and a collaborator of yours to whom your latest album is a tribute to. And I quote what you said on Instagram: "The king, in whose hands rhythm became magic, has left us. Rest in peace, my dearest Zakir. We will meet again." Very powerful, like your music.
Mhm.
Um, Tell me about
Yeah,
your
well,
love and
only to
relationship
remember
with.
those words takes me back to that day. So it's, yeah, it still takes getting used to after 50, how many years? 55 years, yeah. Big chunk of my life and his too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there will be a memorial concert in India in December. So there'll be, and not just Indian musicians, of which there are so many, uh, for whom Zakir is the king, uh, and has been actually since I think he took the crown from his father, Alaraka, when he passed on Zakir. Uh, he really took, and I think all tabla players in India would agree that the king is gone, and now they're waiting for another king to emerge. But what a human being, what a musician, and we miss him still. But this concert will feature, and because of course, Zakir had quite a lot of formations going on in the West. Chris Potter with Dave Holland. Um, I know he had a trio with Bella Fleck. I forget the bass player's name. Um, and of course, he was doing with Masters of Percussion, and he was doing classical tours on top of that with, I think, Raul Chaurasia, the son of Hariprasad Chaurasia, who was actually on the what they call the Remember Shakti album that came out
Mm-hmm.
in 99, was it? Something like
As
that.
in the 90s.
Yes, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And so they will be, it's the kind of memorial that takes place in Mumbai on a number of different venues. And so I'll be there with the rest of the Shakti gang. But there will be Ranjit Barot, who since I've retired, the fourth dimension doesn't exist anymore. But Ranjit and I actually met at what Zakir was doing every year on the 3rd of February, which was to honor his father, Alaraka. And that's actually where I met Ranjit Barot, the excellent drummer who was in Fourth Dimension. And it will be a cast of thousands, or at least hundreds or 50s, but a lot of people. And we'll just give our goodbyes, our adios.
Yeah. Yeah, just a wonderful human being, wonderful spiritual being, which brings me to what I wanted to talk to you about today, because I've been a huge fan of your music, your playing. I followed you since I've started listening to
Thank you, Mike.
jazz.
Thank you.
You're so welcome. And one of the things that and we're going to cover in this issue of JAZZIZ, where you're on the cover. Certainly the new album. Bill Meredith, our editor, delves into it with you. He interviewed you recently. But one of the things that always struck me about you, and I've always been most fascinated with, aside from the albums that I've listened to over and over again, is your spiritual path. Your fans know this. Some of our viewers may not know. You were very closely associated with Sri Chinmoy back in the 70s. And those of your fans who know the story, it's where you adopted the name Mahavishnu, which became synonymous with your music at the time. And you've spoken openly about this over the years. But what I'd love to hear from you is that spirituality that you had a profound impact on you as a player, musician, composer, but also it transcended to the listener. And could you let us have a little bit of insight how that came about and how that really helped you not only create but evolve your music over the decades?
Well, um, the music is really the form, isn't it? That's the real form, but behind the music is the spirit that is of which every human, every living being in the universe is part of. And and my years with Sri Chinmoy were dedicated to learning meditation. Now, it begs the question: what is meditation? Meditation is really one of the main highways to self knowledge or self awareness, the development of awareness, which um, automatically includes the development of perception. Because I think there's something written on some place. Where is it? One of the Greek. Um, what do they call it? I forget now the name. Um, and it was written in rock, "Know thyself,"
Mhm.
which encompasses really all knowledge. So going through um, meditation with music. Well, let's look at music. Music demands a certain inspiration. It demands certainly um, your inner sentiments, because if you're playing notes without the profound passion you have inside, that's all they are in the end. They're just notes. Um, and it's not really to make a message. The music doesn't have a message, um, in spite of the fact that a lot of my compositions names were kind of arrows in the direction I was looking for and or maybe taking at that time. Um, so the development of self knowledge is really the greatest precursor to being a musician, in my opinion, because um, if you have inner inspiration, then that really feeds the music. Without the inspiration, we're pretty much dead. The inspiration, but that's aligned with with the passion that is inside, and it's not. Um, well, it's in that kind of interior passion. That's all I can say, and that's what gives the notes the life. But um, speaking about music or the spirit, is really the fast track to frustration, because you cannot put it into words since it doesn't. It has no reference, and even though, just like I mentioned before, I've like there's a piece called "You Know, You Know," and it's just an affirmation, really. Even though people may see it as an affirmation to themselves, it's an affirmation to myself. I know, I know. You know that you know, and I mean, can AI knows that it knows? I don't think so. This is the fundamental aspect of human and every other kind of awareness that exists in the universe. To know that you know, because we don't know how we know. Because how do I grow my hair? How do I digest my food? I don't know how I do it, but we do it. We all do it because that's part of the being that is invisible to all of us, and we just take it all for granted. This wonderful intelligence of life that moves us and moves us sometimes in directions we don't even know where we're going. And this is part of the path of the spirit, because what why do you meditate? And it's not because if you're meditating to have a goal, then you're not meditating. It's like it's in a way you're tripping.
Mhm.
Um, so you always run into conundrums. I know I'm going on a bit here, but that was the deep
No,
question you
it's
asked me, Michael. So I'm just like
yeah.
trying to articulate it as best as possible. So, but we run into conundrums of things that in the process of self-awareness that we do not understand because there's no logical explanation. But then what's the logic? Yes, there's logic in music, but at the same time, there's no message in music. It's just, it is the message.
Mhm.
Beauty.
Yeah.
That's,
So
oh, that's
well,
really, I should shut up right now. I think about
no,
that.
no. You're right. It is deep, and I can tell you that in the early years when I listened to your music, um, I knew that there was a very spiritual John McLaughlin. But I listened to the music purely on a musical level. I was just a fanatic, a fan. I just I was one of those guys who just poured through the liner notes and read everything I could about you. And I was when I look back, I guess I was a spiritual human being. As I got older, I became more spiritual,
Well,
and
you
it's
always were, Michael. Sorry to interrupt. We all are. We're all
yeah,
of the spirit. But the question is, are we aware of it?
right.
That's the singular difference.
And that's exactly my point. I became more aware of it as I got older, and then not only did your music make sense from a musical perspective that would speak to me, but it also started to make sense from a spiritual perspective, and I started to understand things non non-vocal, non-verbal
Nonverbal. Yeah. Thank you.
musicality that spoke to me. And I do believe that today, based on the music that I listened to that was yours decades ago, I listen to music and I almost can determine, is there a spiritual connection here, or were these musicians just playing notes?
Yeah. But this is this is kind of a gray area because let's just take Miles Davis and John Coltrane, for example, two of the most influential musicians in my life. And here you have, take Miles Davis, the ultimate hedonist in a way, and the ultimate artist. And you have John Coltrane, who was profoundly aware of his connection to God. I mean, I think he grew up in a quite religious
Mhm.
background. And so his articulation of his inner realizations come out with kind of religious overtones. But nobody can tell me that one or the other or any or Miles, for me, in spite of this hedonistic through his sublime art, is as spiritual as anyone else. And not no one, Coltrane is not a millimeter higher than
Mhm.
Miles, simply because he's articulating his inner awareness. Miles was a human being, having got to know him very well, who whose level of awareness and perception was profound, profound. But he looked at life with different eyes, and he had his own reality, as Coltrane had his own reality. But the two realities are equally beautiful
Mhm.
and
No,
moving. That's really, I just want to put religion in this place, because religion, for me, to quote Alan Watts, the greatest religion is no religion at all.
Mhm. Mhm. And it's interesting because religion, there are some religions, for example, listening to music is considered not religious, actually taking away from religion. But I remember there was a quote, I can't remember where I read this, that you said, music is God. And the interesting thing about that is um, that I do believe that from a spiritual, a religious, whatever someone wants to call it, perspective, is that we are able to create music because of what God gave us. And that connection is so important. Yet, like I said, I wasn't aware of that in my
Mm.
early years. You are blessed in that you, at a very young age, became aware of that. I wasn't so fortunate.
Well, you're talking to an old hippie. you know, you know, in the 60s, because I have to revert to that period where uh, LSD, which was fortunately uh, legal and to be found basically anywhere and everywhere,
Mhm.
uh, played a very important role in, because after I don't know, half a dozen trips over maybe 2 years or so, uh, my I made a decision. It was like, well, the world is definitely not going to change, but I can change, because actually I'm already changed. And which was the point where I started to change my diet. And I began looking for someone who could teach me meditation, yoga, etc. So really, that was the point of departure. By 1968, I was kind of pushed into it by my own experiences, let me say, and that the kind of experiences that oblige me to move, do something, to act in a particular way, simply because of the way my perception of my existence in this mysterious and marvelous universe had changed. And it's basically what you're just talking about, when you realize something and you cannot, uh, there's no logical reason why a realization can come to you, but they do. Fortunately, they do. And so we become wiser, hopefully.
And at that point in your life, something else happened, whether it's commercially or camaraderie in your relationship with, for instance, with Carlos Santana. And both, became sort of not only friends, disciples of Sri Chinmoy,
Mm,
but that time for you, I look back and you became a household name. And so not only was John McLaughlin connected to a pop artist, um, but there was also this spirituality, and there were all these things happening at the same time, and maybe because of this awareness that you had. And so, for instance, just on the practical level, today when I mentioned your name at the hotel that I'm staying in, people know your name, and they don't necessarily associate it with jazz, even though they know you're a jazz artist. You're
mm.
John McLaughlin. And I think that has been something that I followed and I'm very fascinated with, when a jazz artist is no longer considered just a jazz artist; they're an artist. And I think. And tell me how you felt about that, when And so on some, there's no argument from even the harshest critics that you're a great jazz guitarist. But then there'd be those, well, yeah, he kind of ventured into, the pop and rock world. He's not even in jazz anymore. Well, then you come back an album or two later with a very jazz album, and you kind of keep us on our toes.
Well, I think that's part of it. The cause of that goes back to really my childhood, where my mother was a violinist, amateur violinist, tried to teach me violin. I hated my sound, and I actually begged her to let me study piano instead, which she did. And from the age of, I was about 6 years old, and at the age of 11, being the youngest of 5 kids, two of my other brothers got infected by the blues boom that swept the UK in 1952. And so, and the guitar came into the house through my brothers, elder brothers. Finally came down to me at the age of 11 with the records of Muddy Waters, and growing up playing Beethoven and Mozart, and then hearing Muddy Waters and Bill Brunsey and Lead Belly, and this was a revelation because they all came together with the guitar at the same time. And I stopped the piano immediately. So gradually, my brothers assumed my education instead of my mother, and they saw my love of the guitar, which exists today, is exactly the same. And over the next few years, became very much influenced by more blues, flamenco, and ultimately jazz. And also thanks to Alan Lomax, an American musicologist who had a program on the BBC, who exposed me to South Indian classical music, which made my hair stand on end. And I was about 14, and I had no idea why. I could only draw answers from that many years later, studying Indian music. So, in a way, all of these influences came to peak after the 60s, because we're talking 1950s here. And by early 1960, 61, I was playing in an R&B band, which was wonderful because I was already aware of Miles already in the 50s, 58, Milestones, 59, Kind of Blue. I knew Coltrane and Bill Evans, Cannonball Adderley, and there's this wonderful world that Miles created around himself and just inspired so many people, including me. But the 60s, even though I wanted to play jazz, I ended up being in rhythm and blues bands, which I love, because you take the R&B out of jazz and there's not much jazz left, really. you know. And I have to say, for example, I was jamming with Carlos just 2 nights ago. He was here playing in Monte Carlo, and right in the middle, he called me up, and there was a guitar there on stage, and we just went into it like two brothers, like we are, because this genre thing about pop, there's great and not so great jazz, there's great and not so great classical music, and there's flamenco included, because the experience playing with Paco was just marvelous, Michael, marvelous. Of course, the Indian thing, my introduction to Indian culture, let's say, began through my desire to study meditation. And in those days, we all went to India, the Beatles, the Stones. Why? Because they've been addressing these existential questions for about 5,000 years, and they've got answers. So by
I married an Indian.
Pardon me?
I married an Indian.
Really? Wonderful. Wonderful. North or south?
South.
South. Oh, so she speaks Tamil.
No, but she actually her family's really from UP. Most of her family,
Wow.
uh,
Okay.
and but I find it interesting because I've learned so much about Indian culture that I was completely unaware of, being a white guy from New Jersey.
That's nice. Nice. Well, I'm a white boy from a little village in Emily Bronte country, population 1 to 20. So we've all got humble origins,
Mhm.
Michael, don't we?
Absolutely.
Uh, by the end of the 60s, I think this is uh, all of these different influences were um, they were like in the oven,
Mhm.
maturing and
Yeah,
baking
yeah.
and cooking, and the meditation, because I really went into it. I needed to address these questions of who am I, what am I doing, what is this unbelievable, unthinkable universe we live in,
Mhm.
and just the great mystery of it all, and so by the end of the 60s, I was already in New York playing with Tony Williams and Miles, who himself, just as I arrived to play with Tony, he was looking for a guitar player. So I was really in the right place at the right time. And for the next 6 months, I saw Miles a lot being around us. He would invite me a lot to his house and pick my brain. And basically, because in the 60s, I'm playing R&B or Motown or soul or occasionally a jazz gig.
Mhm.
So I'd be around Miles' house, and he play a chord. He said, "What do you hear? What do you
Mhm.
hear? Do you hear a riff around that or something?" And I'd say, "Yeah, sure, I hear something." So I'd be playing something, and by the time it was after In a Silent Way, it was about 8 months later, I think. That was January. It was about August, I think, of 69. We went into the studio for Bitches Brew. So I already knew Miles a lot. And but what I can say about the recording, which went platinum, in fact, Carlos gave me a copy of that, the platinum disc from
Mhm.
Miles, where, yeah, I mean, he had CBS do it. I mean, what a
Mhm.
sweetheart. Um, the great thing about Bitches Brew and seeing Miles work, I learned so much from Miles, didn't we all?
Sure.
All of his boys. We were all blessed just to have that opportunity. But in the studio, what I really learned in watching him work was that he didn't really know what he wanted. He didn't really know where he was going, but he knew very well what he didn't want. And what he didn't want was what anyone had done before, including himself. And
Mhm.
so he was well known for these cryptic, because he never tried to tell anyone, in my experience, what to do, what to play, or how to play. He would talk to you like a Zen master and give you a koan which would wipe your mind, and you'd play purely on instinct, which was what he wanted, because that whatever came out at that point was new because he didn't have a mind. It's like the whole proverb: if you're thinking, you're not playing. If you're playing, you're not thinking. I mean, that's how it should be.
Yeah.
That's how it really is. When we're really playing, it's impossible to think. It's
Yeah.
impossible. You're on a different level of awareness. That's all that happens. Or in any
Wow.
creative act, in any
Mhm.
truly creative act, we stop thinking, and that's when things really start happening. It's
Wow.
amazing.
Yeah, one of the things that when I 40 years ago when I started JAZZIZ, you were on the cover and you were holding a guitar synthesizer, and I found it very interesting that someone who was exploring electronics, certainly with Miles, that this was kind of a new sound, and you were one of the first certainly the most prominent first users of guitar synth,
Mm.
usually associated with rockers. I mean, whether it was Jeff Beck, Adrian Belew, Robert Fripp, I can go on and on. Alan Holdsworth, my partner Lee Ritenour. Um,
Mm.
they were all guitar synthers, but you already had that fusion type, like that thing in you to do fusion. Whether it was, I mean, some of your music to a lot of rockers was their prog rock. So there was this fusion, there was this prog rock, there was this jazz, there was this blues, and then you incorporate an electric guitar. And then I'm going to sound a little bit schizophrenic here. And what I found also equally as fascinating was your acoustic playing. The
Mm.
albums that you did were acoustic guitar. It's almost like it's the same John McLaughlin, but a different sound, a different approach. The question I want to ask you is that there's a lot of different John McLaughlin sounds. Um, how do you, especially in a time when you were cutting your teeth, if you would, before Miles and the early albums that you did, there were a lot of guitarists trying to create their own sound. You were one of the ones that I noticed that did forge your own sound, but it's not just one sound. Uh, there's the acoustic John McLaughlin, the synthesizer John McLaughlin, the electric John McLaughlin. How do you manage to forge that your sound that's your own in a time where when you listen to guitarists, you say, well, yeah, that guitarist sounds like him, or that guitarist sounds like her. You have that your own unique sound, and yet it's not just one sound.
Well, I mean, the sound. I would put part of it down to the fact that I began my life as a pianist,
Mhm.
and I still love piano. I mean, you know the album, the Time Remembered. I mean, I spent 18 months transcribing Bill's music
Bill
for
Evans.
guitars, and so it wasn't just a homage to Bill. It was a homage to the acoustic guitar, because the guitar that I discovered at 11 years old was an acoustic guitar. I didn't
Mm,
even know what an electric guitar was. The guitars that I fell in love with was an acoustic guitar. It's one of the reasons I did My Goals Beyond in
mhm,
1970, because
mhm.
I'd done this devotion, which had become a bit of a travesty, since I was out on the road with Tony Williams and what's his name, the guy running that record company, Alan something. Um, he mixed and mastered it, and he chopped it up and put it all together. And I was very upset about that when I heard it. He just did whatever he wanted. So I said, I had a 2 record deal. I'm going to do an acoustic album because I love the acoustic guitar. And that really was, irrespective of what people like, in the end, we have to do what we really want to do.
Mhm.
And the other aspect of that, growing as a teenager and trying to play jazz and listen, I became very, very highly influenced by the horns. Either it was Miles, and even before Coltrane, who became such an influence musically and spiritually, was Cannonball Adderley, the saxophone player,
Sure.
who is still today, he's ahead of everybody still after all these years. What an astounding! I mean, if anybody took the mantle of Charlie Parker, it has to be Cannonball Adderley.
Mm, I
Cannonball had
agree.
a very strong effect on me in the way he articulated
Mhm.
these the phrasing and everything. I got sometimes so frustrated with the guitar because I couldn't get that sassy kind of uh, saxophone sound. So I was trying every which way, and it was only, in fact, um, when I heard Jimmy and Hendrix, and the the way he played the guitar. And all he had was an amplifier, guitar, and a wah-wah pedal. So that was really uh, I didn't care for this smooth jazz tone. I'm actually going to have to leave in a few minutes, Michael,
No, no
myself.
problem. No
Um,
problem.
so so this cool kind of guitar sound. Don't misunderstand me. Jim Hall, Tal Farlow, Wes Montgomery, amazing, wonderful guitar players, but they they didn't have that punch that the horns had, and that was really so important to me. So all my articulation was non-guitarist, simply because I was so dominated by these great musicians who didn't play guitar. In fact, I was very frustrated because in Miles's band he never had a guitar player. In Coltrane's band he never had a guitar player. I wanted somebody who was playing with Train or Miles and playing that
Wow.
style of music, because I would listen to the guitar players and it would be nice, and Wes Montgomery would be nice, and but they, that wasn't the new school. The new school was Miles and Coltrane and
Yeah.
Bill Evans too. Bill
Yeah.
had a very profound effect on me. So all of these impacted me and obliged me to look for different ways of articulation.
Wow. Well, John, thank you for joining me today and sharing your stories of life, your wisdom, and your spirituality with us. Until next time, I hope we can do this again.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you. Bless you.
Thank you, John.
Take care of yourself.
You do the
Thanks.
same. Bye bye.